Hi, this is Dave, sending this video out to public for anybody who might be interested. As I've gotten older, my wife and I have both been on a lower carb diet, and people have asked me about a recipe that I have for making either nut or blueberry muffins that are essentially quite low carb. In fact, they can be very low carb, and they're pretty low carb the way I make them, and just a little bit more. So what we're starting out with is almond flour. I happen to be using this Blue Diamond, but whatever you choose to use doesn't matter. This one's not too terribly expensive and medium, pretty nice finely ground for a not too expensive almond flour. We want 1 solid cup. Don't worry if it's a little overflowing. The dough that we will be making is far more like a dough than it is like a batter. Normally muffins come out in more like a batter. It's a lighter thing that puffs up, almost more like a cake puff. This is going to be a little bit more like a bread dough, sort of a very light, airy, soft bread dough, but still a bread dough. So that's 1 good cup of almond flour. You might have to add more. We have to get this to the right consistency so that you can work it a little bit in the end, which we'll see when we get there. Then for the sweetener, I'm using a combination of sweeteners. I use part of this, I guess you pronounce it Shuriken or Shuriken Gold, which is a brown sugar substitute. I don't use all of this. If you're a person who can tolerate artificial sweeteners and some mild aftertaste. This has a very, very mild aftertaste, but it does have a tiny, tiny bit. When I made these things one time with all of this, about 3 tablespoons of this, my wife said they're good, but there's a little bit of an aftertaste, and there was, just a small amount. So what I've done is I've combined some of this along with some regular brown sugar. The regular brown sugar adds that natural sweet aftertaste that you get with sugar without adding too many carbs, because we're just adding 2 teaspoons. So what we're going to do to this 1 cup there, we're going to get a sort of heaping tablespoon, and this can depend on what you like, how much you go by taste, but as I use like a heaping tablespoon of that Shuriken Gold, the artificial sweetener, the no carb artificial sweetener. And then what I do is I take about 2 slightly heaping teaspoons of regular dark brown sugar. And to give some batter or some rise to these, I'm going to add a heaping teaspoon of baking soda. That's it for the dry ingredients. Now the ones I'm going to make here are blueberry, but I'll also, a lot of times, instead of blueberry, I'll make nut, like I like to add pecans. We usually have pecans at home. I'll make pecans. If I'm going to add pecans, I will stir those in here into the dry contents. If I'm making blueberry, I don't like to add the blueberries too early. I sort of put them in at the very, very end so that I don't smash them too much. So what I want to do is just get these ingredients blended pretty well. That's it for the dry ingredients. Now the moist or wet ingredients, I use this same 1 cup of mozzarella. Now I have a shredded mozzarella, and you're just going to fill the measuring cup. You're not going to pack it down. There's no need to try and, so it's 1 cup light. If a couple pieces fall off here, it doesn't matter. There, approximately. There we go. 1 cup mozzarella and 1 ounce of cream cheese. This is this regular Philadelphia cream cheese. To mix this, we've got to melt the cheese somewhat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the microwave. I'm going to put it in for 30 seconds. It'll really take about a minute, but I found out if you put it in for 1 minute right away, a lot of times the edges of the cheese, at the very edge, since the microwave tends to heat from the outside in, you're going to brown or darken or dry out the cheese somewhat. So what I do is I go for 30 seconds, which is coming up now. Okay. And then see how it's melted more around the edges. So what I'm going to do is just give it a little stir, try and incorporate just a tiny bit. I'm not going to worry about anything that's left over on my spoon. I'm just going to let it down. I'm going to add another 30 seconds. See, so I've got my minute without overdoing or drying out the edges of the mozzarella cheese. By the way, you got to watch your mozzarella a little bit if it gets old or if it's a cheaper brand which has a lot of fillers in and so forth. You're going to pick up a little bit of an ammonia smell. The cheese will actually release a tiny bit of ammonia when you're cooking. If you're smelling ammonia, especially if it starts to become more than just the tiniest amount, check your mozzarella and go to a new one. Here we go now. You can see that as I stir this, it turns into, oh, what's a good word, a glob? But that's essentially what it is. Now I'm going to add egg. Okay, so we're taking 1 egg. Now, I'm going to stir the egg enough to break the yolk and sort of get it to go around the outside of the cheese mixture in that fashion. And since I refrigerate my eggs and they're cold, if you don't refrigerate, you might not need this. But because mine are refrigerated, I need an extra 15 seconds to warm that egg up a little bit so that we can get some incorporation with the cheeses. Because right now the egg is cooling down the cheese into a solid lump, and the egg is cold and nothing will want to mix. So now we have our 15 seconds there, and we come out and we start stirring. Now you'll find out that at this point, the egg really does not want to incorporate very well into the cheese. This is where I add apple cider vinegar. I just use a cap because 1 capful is approximately 1 teaspoon. So 1 capful of apple cider vinegar. This is ostensibly to help with the rising of the muffins, but in reality, it also helps the egg incorporate into the cheese. You find out that while this is pretty well incorporating already, you can see it forming one solid consistency. If I didn't have that vinegar in there, I'd be fighting a lot harder to get that egg to incorporate. So it sort of kills 2 birds with 1 stone. You can see it again forming into a sort of a solid mixture. Now we're going to go over and we're going to put in the solid contents. I put in about, maybe a half to 2/3 initially, and you're just going to stir it. But you're going to pick up the stuff around the edges, and you can see that what's happening is as the solids are incorporated into the cheese mixture, it's forming sort of a gooey mass. I'm going to, my hands, I washed my hand, by the way, immediately before I started this because I am going to use my hands a little bit. Now, it depends how my mixture looks. I'm going to tap it down and fold it in. Tap down, roll it in. If you get it picked up too early and work it too hard, you're going to wind up with sort of a sticky mess. What you want is sort of a dough-like consistency. I pick it up, I work it a little, I try and pick up a little bit more of the residue. What I want is something that's not too terribly sticky. If I haven't had enough of the flour, of the almond flour in there, I'm going to wind up with something very sticky, very pasty, that's going to be a real mess to work with. So if you need to, you know, now this is not a bad consistency right now. You can see it's loose, it's sort of dough-like, but it's not yes, it's over my hands a little bit, but it's not terrible. If you feel it's a little too sticky yet, you can take a small amount of the almond flour, just another tablespoon or even less. I'll put a little bit more in here so you can see. And I'll just sprinkle that in. And then I'll work that in. So the amount of almond flour that you're actually going to use is going to depend a little bit on how much cheese you had and, you know, the exact amount of the other ingredients, how big your egg was, all that, so that you can get sort of a nice dough, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to elongate it, like so, and I'm going to turn it in half, so that I have two pieces. I always work, this is only enough for 6 muffins. Even if I normally bake 12 at a time, but I make 2 batches of 6 because it's much easier to work the dough in this size. You can imagine if this thing's twice as big and you got your hands in there. Okay, so I'm gonna get some blueberries. Should have gotten these out earlier. Naturally, there's always a case where you don't think of, there's always something you don't think of. Well, in this case, it was getting the blueberries all the time. These are gargantuan blueberries that I happened to pick up the last time. Normally, what I would do is in each muffin, I would put about 5 or 6 blueberries. Since these are so big, I'm going to put about 3. So you can see what I'm doing is I'm taking about 1/3 of the dough. I'm going to put my 3 gargantuan, in this case, blueberries in there, press them in slightly, and just roll them over. Roll it into a ball, drop it into my muffin tray, which is lined with the paper cup liners. Take the next one, take 3 more of the blueberries, press them in, close them up, roll them. Like I say, if the blueberries were more or less regular size, usually 5, sometimes 6 if you get a smaller one in there. But if I use 5 of these, I'm going to be overpowering everything. So you can see I'm in the second piece of dough, once again taking about 1/3 of it. And it doesn't matter exactly, these things are never going to be the exact size as, you know, everyone into itself exactly the same size. They're going to vary. Some are going to be bigger than others. Don't worry about it. It'll all even out. When it comes to carbs, you know, how many carbs are we doing this with? Well, depends what you're doing with these muffins. If you used all the synthetic sweetener, the artificial sweetener, you didn't use any sugar at all, and if you made the nut, which has lower carbs, each one of these muffins would have about 3 grams of carbs. Add the sugar, you add about another gram of carbs, so each one will have roughly 4. Add the blueberries instead of the nuts, and it adds more, so that each one's going to have 5 or slightly over, approximately 5. So there you can see the muffins. Here were the 3 I did earlier that we didn't photograph. Those are the nut. You can see the pieces of pecan in there. Here are the blueberries. You see that the muffin tray is liners, and you can see that it's sitting in a tray of water. I preheated my oven to 400 degrees. Fahrenheit, obviously. case somebody's watching from Europe or not Argentina. Okay, what we do to control the temperature, I'm going to take a piece of aluminum foil. This is the wide, heavy-duty aluminum foil. And I'm going to make a tent that's going to cover, completely cover the muffins. What this does is it's going to keep all the radiant energy off the muffins. We're just going to have temperature. The moisture is going to keep them moist so they don't dry out. Remember, there's no shortening in this recipe. So if you do get them too dry, they could become very dry. Okay, we're just going to put them in the oven. And bake them for 25 minutes. Now, we won't make you sit here and wait 25 minutes, but we'll just talk about what's going to happen. At the end of the 25 minutes, what I do is I just pull that foil off, turn the oven off, and let them sit for about 7 minutes or more. What will happen then, you'll notice when you pull the foil off, they're not very brown, but they are baked. Once you pull the foil off and you give them that extra 7 minutes or so while the oven's cooling down, they will brown, and you'll get a nice brown top to the muffins. The longer you cut them in, if you're like me and you set your timer and then forget about it and don't hear it, you might wind up with that 7 minutes being 14 minutes. This is one of the reasons you turn the oven off. You won't overcook them. You won't burn them. The most you would do is get them a little bit more brown on the top, but they'll still be good. So that's it. That's the approximate carb content. You can see obviously that's not exact for each one. They're not even the same size. You put different ingredients in, you get different results. Give them a try. If you have any problems, you can give me a call or prefer a text at 941-661-9225, and I'll be glad to answer them. Or you can also contact through the website where this will be, or the site, the YouTube site that this will be posted on, which is the Milonga Pasional site, since Karen and I run Milonga Pasional, the Argentine Tango site, Argentine Tango Milonga, here up in Sarasota. So that should be it.